call to worship. The darkness deepens and the Lord grows troubled. Can we watch with him? Can we be the friends at his table who share his bread and wine? And can we be the companions who journey with him to the end?
Come, let
Come,
us
let us
worship.
worship.
Let us watch.
Let us give thanks for such great love.
Amen.
Our opening hymn is 305, Jesus Paid It All. Hymn number 305. Some points are done responsibly. O Lord Jesus, we are stunned at your passion and your commitment towards us. You did not run from the darkness. You did not hide from your accusers. You did not fade into safe obscurity. You stepped with determination into darkness, willingly giving yourself to whip and fist, to wood and nails. We praise you, gracious Lord,
for what you are prepared to endure to reconcile with God.
We praise you, gracious Lord,
for your
words of forgiveness and the invitation to paradise. Forgive us that allow ourselves to become too familiar with this story, that we take your suffering too lightly, and we receive your grace too cheaply. As we watch with you when the darkness encroaches, let us remember what this journey means and count again the cost of love.
Amen.
Amen. may be seated for the reading. I'm not going to do all of that reading that it says. I'm just going to do the last portion of that reading. It's John chapter 13, verses 31 through 35. That's the final portion of that reading. And let me read that for you. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me. And as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The word of the Lord. Yes. Thanks be to God. A pastor who is also a blogger, and she writes, she says, many people want to come this night to church, but sometimes they don't know why they are coming. Especially with this word Maundy Thursday, people really don't know why they are coming. A lot of people come because they wanted to be here, probably because it's part of your tradition to be on a church on a Maundy Thursday night. So what she says is a lot of people get the idea that they should be here in church, but they really don't know why, because this word Maundy confuses them. They know Palm Sunday because Jesus triumphantly enters Jerusalem and the palms are waved and hosannas are sung. And so they know Palm Sunday. They even know Good Friday because they know Good Friday is the day that Jesus is put on the cross. By the way, when you come tomorrow, you are not coming for a funeral service. If you think Good Friday is a funeral service, it's not a funeral service. So a lot of people know Good Friday as well, and they even know how Easter works. But when it comes to Maundy Thursday, they really don't know. So before I even explain what Maundy Thursday is all about, I'll just give you a little bit of a background of how this works. Today, if you go to a Jewish synagogue, it's be pretty full. You won't even get a place to park your car. You won't even get a place to go and get a seat. It's that full because this is a very special night for them. So if you read the three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three of them talk about the meal that Jesus has. Is that Jesus celebrates a Passover meal with them. So if you read the three Gospels, then this Thursday might not be called Maundy Thursday. It might be called a Seder meal Thursday or a Passover meal Thursday. Now what Jesus does is very interesting. He takes the Passover idea and he reframes it for them. Where the lamb is sacrificed, Jesus kind of points to himself and he says, "That's me." So he kind of reframes it. Now, originally the Passover meal is celebrated to commemorate God bringing the people of Israel out of Egypt. And so that's the bondage from which they came. And so Jesus looks at them and he takes that same meal and he turns it over. So that's what happens if you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But only in John does he talk something else. He's not talking about the meal. If you look at chapter 13, he does not start with the meal. He just gets his disciples to come to a place. Right? But it says it was just 6 days before Passover. So we really don't know what is Jesus doing that day. But there is one thing that he does which is completely different from the other gospel writers. You might even ask, why is Jesus so interested in washing the disciples' feet more than celebrating a Passover meal? Is that right? He washes the disciples' feet. Now if you look at throughout history, especially with the Catholic Church, the washing of the disciples' feet took a really big, important event in the life of the church. Even as recent as the new Pope that is there. he went and washed the feet of prisoners. And these were, some of them were juveniles. And so he went and washed. So for them, especially for the Catholic Church, the washing of the disciples' feet was absolutely very important. It's only in the Protestant church we don't get to do that. I remember when we did the washing of the feet at the previous church that I worked. It was very interesting. It was easy for us to wash somebody's feet, but it was super hard to give my feet for somebody to wash my feet. I don't know. Have you ever tried giving your feet to somebody to wash your feet? It's not easy. It's very hard. It was very easy for me to hold somebody's feet and wash it. Is that right? So Jesus does something that's very unique, and he does it only in John. So which means he's telling us something that's very important that the church should follow. So probably the one symbol that the church, especially the Protestant church, has forgotten is the towel and the basin. We have come up with the cross, we have come up with the crown, we have done all of that, but the one symbol that we have missed it is the cross, is the towel and the basin. So Jesus washes the disciples' feet, and while he is washing, we talked about last time, and remember in our Lenten meditations also, I talked about the triclinium, the table that is 3 sides. So it was easy for somebody to wash the feet of the guests who are there, because your feet is outside and it's easy to wash. So Jesus must have gone around and washed everybody's feet. Is that right? And then he comes to Peter to wash his feet, and Peter says, God, it's not enough for you to just wash my feet. You have to wash me through and through. So Jesus looks at him and says, hey, listen, that's not how it works. If you have already taken a bath, you don't have to be clean again. I just need to wash your feet. And Jesus says to him, and says, not everybody is clean. One of you is going to betray me. And so that's where our scene ends. And then I read the reading, isn't it? Jesus looks at, and this is how the reading goes from 31. He says, when he had gone out, who was that gone out? Judas had gone out. And so Jesus says, my Father will glorify. And then he goes on to say, little children, I will not be with you any longer. And that kind of disturbs them. Because here he was with them, he taught them, he did amazing things with them. And suddenly he says, I'm not going to be with you longer. And then he says something that is very profound. And that is where I want you to talk. Just listen to me. He says, where I am going, you cannot come. And then he says, I give you a new commandment. Is that right? I give you a new commandment. That's where we get Maundy Thursday. Maundy basically means, in Latin, is where we get the word mandate. Is that right? It's the word mandate. So that's where we get the idea of Maundy Thursday. But bear with me, I'm trying to explain something. It might a little bit confuse you, but just bear with me, because this is so important for the church to hear. It was important for me to hear this message as well. Jesus says, I give you a new commandment. And so I asked the question, what is so new about it? Look at what it says. I give you a new commandment, and it says that you love one another just as I have loved you, that you should also love one another. Now, I kept asking me this, that's not a new covenant, that's not a new commandment, it's an old commandment. Is that right? I don't think there is a new commandment, because if you go and read Leviticus, very simply it says, thou shalt love your neighbor as yourself. What is so new? So I kept pushing that idea of why is Jesus saying that this is a new commandment? Are you with me so far? Very simple, isn't it? He keeps saying, I'm going to give you a new commandment. Keep asking, why is this a new commandment? The old commandment is very simple. There was a guy, especially if you read the gospel, it says there was a guy who came and fell before Jesus' feet. And he asked him the simple question. He said, you tell me, what is the most important commandment? You remember what Jesus said? It's not those 10 he says. He says there are only 2. Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, your soul, and your strength, which is basically from your gut. You've got to love God from here. Sometimes it's easy to love God from here. But to love God from here is super difficult. And so Jesus says, you have to love God and then love your neighbor. But look at this one. It says, it's not talking about God. The new commandment is very simple, that you shall love one another. I was watching a video, and that video said, it's very interesting what the video said was, Jesus rewrites this commandment in a very different way. He doesn't say that you shall love your neighbor, but you shall love one another. So the video went and explained, maybe is Jesus trying to expand this idea of the neighbor, which means the neighbor is just not one who lives next to me, but it's the world out there. Is Jesus trying to expand the idea of who we should love? But no. I don't think Jesus is expanding. Jesus is actually narrowing it down. In fact, if you read, some of the scholars say, John is now, when he's writing this gospel, he's actually limiting that you and I are called not called to love the whole world, but just each other. Love one another, it says. Is that right? So I was thinking to myself, this new commandment that Jesus is giving to us is not that we are called to love a whole, but we are called to love each other, which means he's kind of narrowed it down. And so I asked myself the question, why is Jesus doing it again? Why is Jesus narrowing it down? Shouldn't Jesus be expanding it more and more? So that we should be loving more people instead of just us? Yeah? Shouldn't that be Jesus' command when he is leaving this world? Shouldn't Jesus be saying, hey, listen, you should walk around on the road. Anybody who comes, you should be loving. Shouldn't that be Jesus' command? Instead of that, he looks at the disciples and he says, hey, you got to love each other. And so I said, maybe that is the new commandment. And then when I pushed it a little hard, this is what I offered. I just wanted to offer this to you. This is very important. If you look at it from the context of where Jesus was speaking this commandment, it's very important because this night, Jesus will be betrayed. Jesus will be denied. Jesus will be ridiculed. Jesus will be mocked. Is it right? From that context, if you see, what Jesus was saying is that you've got to love somebody who will betray you. You've got to love somebody who will deny you. Isn't it? I don't think, when Jesus spent that 3 years with all of the disciples, he also spent a lot of time with Judas, isn't it? He would have spent a lot of time with Peter. They would have, in that 3 years, they would have built a solid bonding. Am I making sense? You would have so much bonding. Now, the reason why Jesus says that, it's easy for us to love a neighbor who we don't know, and it's very hard to love somebody with whom we have built intimacy, and that person has betrayed us. Is that right? Husbands and wives who betray each other. Jesus says, you got to love that person. Is that right? And I think he kind of turns it, the whole commandment, on its head, isn't it? Jesus calls me to love somebody, not the person who I don't know, but the person who I know intimately and who betrays me. Yeah, that's hard, isn't it? Because Jesus knew exactly that later on in the church, there will be people within the church who will betray each other, who will deny each other. Yeah, isn't it? Just imagine you go and share with a friend something that's so important, and you tell the person that don't tell it to anybody. And they go and say it to everybody. That's a betrayal of your trust, isn't it? Isn't it? And Jesus says, when that happens, love that person. That's why Jesus doesn't make it broader. Jesus makes it narrower because that is important for us as a church. It's easy for us to, when we were doing this Spring Fest outside, it's easy to love somebody who comes from the road and be a part of our celebration. Strangers could be easily loved. But what is hard to love is somebody who betrays your trust. And Jesus calls and he says to the church, you've got to love that person. That's your number one. Number two, see what Jesus says. He says, the new commandment that I give you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. Probably look at Jesus. Jesus, that's a tall order. Isn't it? So oftentimes we kind of tell ourselves, I cannot love my neighbor like Jesus loved. Because Jesus is God. Jesus is the superhuman who walked in our midst. Jesus can do that, but I cannot do it. That's a tall order, Jesus. Making sense? So we don't do it. But that's the command, isn't it? It's a new mandate. I don't think Jesus was talking tonight and saying to those disciples, hey, I'm going to give you a new suggestion. No. That's not what he's saying. Is that right? He's saying, I'm going to give you a command. Love one another just as I have loved you. It's a tall order. And so we don't want to do it. Now look at Sermon on the Mount. G.K. Chesterton. G.K. Chesterton, who was one of the most prolific writers in England. And he says something that's so beautiful. He says, when you read the Sermon on the Mount for the first time and you tell yourself, this is impossible. Right? And then he says, when you read the Sermon on the Mount the second time, you tell yourself there are some things that are possible. And then he says you keep it reading it third and the fourth time and the fifth time, and you keep reading the Sermon on the Mount over and over again. Then finally you tell yourself it's actually possible. Isn't it? Because the reason why I say that if Jesus had to say those things, I don't think he would say something that's impossible for us to follow. Are you with me?
Yes.
I don't think. It's a tall order, but it's not impossible order. Isn't it? And I think that's what the new commandment is all about. A new commandment to love somebody who betrays us. And it's a new commandment which might look like a tall order, but it's a possible order. It's a wake-up call for the church. I'm being very serious. It's a wake-up call for each one of us sitting in this place. You think it's impossible? No, Jesus would not have said something that was impossible for us to follow. Jesus will always say something that is possible for us to follow. And I think it is important, isn't it? It's super important to understand loving one another just as Jesus loved is a possibility in every Christian life. The last one, you know what he says? And he says, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples. The only way, he says, the world will know that you are my disciples is not by the bumper sticker on your car. Or the t-shirt that you might have which says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's not by the number of missionaries that the church will support. It's not by the local missions that we are involved in. We kind of, we kind of cover ourselves in all of this. Under this pretext, oh, I'm doing things for God. I'm engaged in local mission for God. I give my money for God. You know how I love? That's how I love. But you know what Jesus says? No, that's not how people will come to know. It's not by the number of projects that we do. It's not by the increasing our budget from 10% to 15% that people outside will come to know that this is a Christian church. You know how they will come to know? By the way we love each other. Very important. Very, very important. Tonight, it's your call. Honestly, I sat down here and I struggled with it and I said, God, where do you want me to go with this one? And God was reminding me, simply tell your congregation the only way that the world will know is not by the things we do, but the way we love each other. If we have been unloving, as I pray with you, tell God, God, I have not been very loving. But this night you are giving a commandment to your disciples and to us. Teach me, pour in my heart a love for my neighbor. Pour within my heart a love for somebody sitting next to me. I'm making sense? Because when you come to this table, you will come here to receive God's body and blood. This is the ultimate love that you will ever experience. Is that right? He not only modeled it, but he expects of you and me. So when you come here, when you receive this body and blood, guess what? This will strengthen you until we meet next Maundy Thursday. Folks, Jesus didn't say because it was nice. Jesus said because that's very important for the church. Now it's your call and my call to say to Jesus as I pray with you, Jesus, I want to offer my life to you. Jesus didn't come this night to make a show of himself. I don't think Jesus stood there or even talked to his disciples so that they'd find it fascinating. But Jesus he did all of this so that you and I might be able to model our lives just like him. Let me remind you, it can be a tall order, but it's never an impossible order. You and I have the gift and the power to love. You and I have the choice that we can make to love somebody. Or you and I can just walk out of this place and say, God, this is impossible. I don't think Jesus gave his life for us to say it's impossible. Jesus gave his life so that it's possible in our lives. It's possible as a church. It's possible when you come to the table. God will remind you that it's possible, it's possible, it's possible. God, we thank you. We thank you reminding us, oh God, that we are called to love one another just as you have loved us. We thank you. We ask your blessing as we prepare our hearts to come to this table, to receive your body and blood. We thank you for doing that.